Hi, this is Ashish from developerhead.net and welcome to Java Design Pattern series. So, in today's session, we'll be going to see the most interesting creational design pattern, which is factory design pattern. So, in this session, we'll be going to see what is factory design pattern. Then we'll be going to see why we need a factory design pattern with help of very simple use case, which is vehicle and client. And we will also going to see what are the drawbacks of creating the object without factory design pattern. Then there are simple rules or steps to create the factory design pattern, which I am anyway going to cover. And then we will going to implement the factory design pattern with small car building application. And lastly, we will be going to see the advantages and some features of the factory design pattern. So now let's see what is creational design pattern first. So what is creational design pattern? So basically creational design pattern comes on those places where you want to deal with the object creation. So basically it's a similar type of object creation. This kind of a design pattern reduce the complexity at the time of a object creation, as well as they increase the stability, maybe in some controlled fashion, right? So let's just understand how this basically works. So let's say I have one class which is a vehicle and it has one method which is a drive method. Okay, now this vehicle class has multiple types. So maybe I have a two-wheeler vehicle and I have a four-wheeler vehicle who's extending this vehicle class, and they provide the implementation of a drive method according to their own way. So for example, two-wheeler says driving with two-wheeler and four-wheeler says driving with four-wheeler vehicle. Now there is a separate client who is using this vehicle class drive method, right? So in this case, what client will do? Client will simply create the object of the vehicle and it will call the drive method. So in this case, basically client is going to create the object of the vehicle. Now here client knows there are two different kind of types or objects available in the vehicle. So it can be either two-wheeler or four-wheeler. So on the basis of certain conditions, client added this creational logic of a vehicle into his application. So for example, if vehicle type is 2, then it will create the two-wheeler vehicle, and if vehicle type is four-wheeler or 4, it will create a four-wheeler vehicle, and accordingly it will call the drive methods and he will get a result according to the what type of object it is, right? So in this case, if you see, so basically all the creational logic is basically at the client side, right? So now let's further understand this. So now let's see what kind of a drawback of this kind of approach that we are using. So now as we see, we have a vehicle which is of two different type, the two-wheeler and four-wheeler, and there is one a client who is holding the logic of creating the vehicle and using it, right? Now let's say this vehicle is your separate application, right? And this application is very famous and your client is using it. Now there are also other clients who attached with your application and they wanted to use your two-wheeler as well as four-wheeler vehicle. So they are very happy with it and the number of clients is getting increased day by day, right? So in this case, what happened basically is each client is just creating the vehicle class and they are calling the method, and all their creational logic is resides at the client level. Now what you want is you decided to add the additional vehicle which is three-wheeler vehicle. Now there is a bit problem because every client now only knows the two-wheeler and the four-wheeler type, right? And they are holding the logic to create the only two-wheeler and four-wheeler. Now if they want to use the three-wheeler vehicle, they need to update their creational logic, right? So in this case, basically all the client needs to update their creational logic, which is bit difficult. And also let's say if there are thousands of client which were using your vehicle object, in that case it's very difficult to convey the client that they update their business logic. Why this is happening? Because your client is very tightly coupled with your vehicle class. So that is why it's very difficult to, if you add any kind of a change in your vehicle class, it going to impact your client, right? So now let's see how the factory design patterns solves this kind of a problem. So what is factory design pattern? So factory is, of course, is an creational design pattern, right? And this factory design pattern comes on those places where there is a common type or common interface between the object creation. So in our case it's a vehicle, right? So all the two-wheeler or four-wheeler or three-wheeler vehicle is basically have their own one common type, which is a vehicle, right? So factory design pattern is, of course, use a common type or common interface to create the object, and it also provides a way to, not to expose their creational logic to actual client, right? And it also promotes a loose coupling for common type of objects. And in factory design pattern, of course, there is a centralized location where your object is getting created, right? So let's understand how we can implement this using factory design pattern. So let's say we will see the similar example. Now I have a car class or a car interface who has a drive method, right? And now this car has a multiple types. So maybe I have a luxury car which is implementing the drive method, and I have a mini car which is implementing the drive method according to his own implementation, right? Now I also have a client who is using this car drive method, right? So now in case of the factory method, so basically earlier all the creational logic was resides at the client level, right? Now instead of adding this logic to the client level, we will add this logic to some other method which is a factory class, right? So basically there is a factory method who will holds the logic of this object creation, and whenever client wants any object, he will consult with the factory class and get the object. So basically your factory method will create all this kind of objects, right? And client is using the factory classes. Now here basically all your car and luxury car and mini car are basically called as the product classes, right? And the factory classes are basically called as the creator classes because it deals with the object creation. So in our earlier cases, the creator classes is basically the client, right? And we are creating the object as well as it were using the object as well. So now we have segregated the creator classes inside your separate class, which is a factory class. Now the advantage of this approach is, even if you add any additional type in your product class, there is no impact on the client side, right? So you just need to update your factory class which belongs to your application, right? And anyway you just need to tell the client that we have added the car and there is no changes at his size, right? And your client can get the advantage of your additional functionality or additional type of object which you have added. So now let's see what are the rules or steps to create the factory design pattern. So first is you must have the product classes, then you must have the creator or factory class, and lastly you must have the client class who is using your product by using the factory class methods, of course. Then your product classes must have one common interface. So in our earlier case, the two-wheeler or four-wheeler vehicle has a one common class which was a vehicle, and in our next case the luxury car or mini car has a one common interface which was a car, right? Then next is the your factory class must holds the object creation logic, that's the mandatory thing. And lastly your client class must use the factory class method instead of direct object creation. Now let's go ahead and start implementing our car build application. So now let's go ahead and get our hand dirty with the coding. So I will simply first create the new package. So I will say develop.com.developer.hud. I will say factory, right? So I will create all my factory design pattern classes here. Let's create first our common interface. I will say click new interface and I will say car. Okay, so car is my interface, and here I will simply add one method. So I will say void, I will say drive. Okay, and now let's create the car model. So I will say simply say new and I will say enum. Okay, enum, I will say here car model, right? And here I will add my additional car model. So I will say luxury, so I will say luxury and I will say mini. So as of now I will only add two. Okay, so I have luxury type of car and like mini type of car, right? Now let's create our product class. So I will say click new and I will say class and I will say luxury. Okay, so luxury car, right? And here let's implement, so implements, right? And I will say car, right? So I will say implement car. And before even before implementing the methods, let's decide what is the car model it is, right? So I will say car model, right? So car model, I will say car, I will say model. Okay, so model is equal to car model dot luxury. Okay, and let's implement the drive method now. So I will override and implement the drive method, and here I will simply add my sysout. So I will say sysout and I will say driving, and here I will say this dot model, right? And car. Okay, so that's it. And yeah, so that's it. So we have our product class ready, right? So we have created the product class which implements your common interface type, which is car, right? And I also defined the what is the model of this car, which is luxury in our case, right? Now let's create another product class. So what I will do, I will simply copy this class and I will just update the name. So I will say mini car. Okay, and here I will just update the model, which is mini, right? So our product classes is ready. Now let's go ahead and create the factory class. So I will say new class and I will say car factory, right? So car factory, and here what I will do is I will create one method. So I will say public, which of course return a type of a car. Okay, so car, and I will say get car. Okay, and which of course take a car model, right? So I will say car model, right? And here let's say if it is returning a car, so car is equal to new and null, right? And let's return the car, so blank car as of now, so return car, right? And let's add our switch, so switch statement, right, which is of type car model, right? And here I will say case if it's a luxury car, right? So I want to return the luxury, right? So car is equal to new luxury car, right? And I will say break over here, right? And let me format this and copy this, right? And I will here simply say instead of luxury I will say mini car, right? So mini car, and it will create the object of mini car, right? So we are returning the luxury car or a mini car on the basis of what is the car type or car model, right? Now we also have our car factory class is ready. Now let's go ahead and create the client class. So I will say new, I will say class, and I will say let's say car client, right, which has a main method. Okay, and here first of course we will create the car factory. So I will say car factory, right? So I will say factory is equal to new car factory, right? And what I want a car, right? So I will say car, which I am getting the a car from the factory, so I will say factory dot get car, and I will simply pass the model. So I will say car model dot, let's say luxury car. I want a luxury car, right? And I will say car is equal to sorry, car dot driver method. We simply call the driver method, right? So on the basis of what is the car model that we passed, we will get the appropriate object, right? So if you simply run this, you will get the statement, right? So driving the luxury car. Suppose if you just copy this and just change the car model, right? So which is in case a mini car, right? And if you run this, so next time you will get the, of course, the mini car, right? So now your client is just demanding the product class on basis of certain condition or even without a condition, right? It's the factory class who is deciding what kind of object needs to be written back to the client. That's the most basic and most advantage of this factory design pattern, right? So now let's say if you want additional car, which is, let's say I will say sedan, right? So sedan car, if I decided to add a new car model, then I just need to create the product class, right? So let me copy, and here I will say sedan, right? So sedan car, and I will just update the object. So here I will just say sedan, right? And I just need to update my factory, right? So I will just simply copy this, and okay, and here I will say sedan, right? So sedan car, and I just need to update this sedan. So your object should be of sedan car, right? And now your car needs to be updated, of course, and if you just pass the model as a sedan, you will get the appropriate implementation of that particular object, right? So if you see, so we are getting the appropriate output, right? So there is very less changes at the client side, because he just even we can say there are no changes at the client side if your factory is deciding what kind of object needs to be shared, right, or sent. So this kind of a pattern is basically used when you want to update your product classes, of course, and without impacting your client, right? So this is very crucial design pattern in terms of the crucial design pattern in terms of course a creational design pattern, and very useful in lot of application once you wanted to refactor your code, or if you wanted to update your code very easily without impacting the your client code or client kind of a module, right? So this is how we implement the factory design pattern. Now let's go ahead and see some of the features and advantages of this factory design pattern. So what are the features of the factory design pattern? So first, this design pattern provides an approach to code to interfaces rather than the implementation. So if we saw in our examples that we use the car interface at the client side, right? So client doesn't know about what are the actual implementation, whether it's a two-wheeler or four-wheeler vehicle, or whether it's a luxury car or a sedan car, right? So client only knows about the actual interface, which is car, and it will simply call the appropriate methods, right? Then next is it promotes the loose coupling between client and the product classes. So client is not tightly coupled with the product classes, and even if you make any change in the product class, there is no impact on the client classes, right? So it also provides a centralized location for a client to get the objects, right? So we saw there is a factory class who provides a method for a client to get the actual objects on basis of certain conditions, which also minimizes the changes at the client side later, right? So basically where this factory design patterns is used, so these factory design patterns have a lot of real world example. But so if you are getting the database connection, so for example if we say Hibernate, so Hibernate is basically internally connected, get a connection to lot of database internally, right? So it can connect to MySQL, or it can connect to Oracle, or it can connect to maybe a MongoDB or a PostgreSQL, right? However, before you connect into a database, you pass the type of the database that you wanted to connect, right? So that we can say it's a good example of the factory design pattern, because Hibernate provides that a generic or centralized location. So even if tomorrow if you want to connect to the MySQL from maybe if you want to shift from Oracle to the MySQL, you can easily just change the type, right, and you will get that other database, right? So there are no changes you have to done at your side, right? So this all will be useful while you are using the factory design pattern. So I hope you understand the concept of factory design pattern. So as I said earlier, a design pattern is such a subject which is very easy to understand, but when it comes to the implementation, it's very difficult. Until and unless you do some round of coding on your side, you won't be able to understand what kind of a design pattern you are going to apply on your day-to-day activities. So I suggest all of you to go ahead and implement this example, or you can implement some other example which I explained, like you can create a Hibernate factory, right, which will returns the product classes like MySQL database or Oracle database, and you can create a client and just try to go ahead with it, try to fun with it. So if you think this information is valuable, please do like this video, share this video, and please subscribe to this channel. Thank you.